He stood up at their anniversary dinner to introduce his mistress to 43 people. And he called her a woman with ambition, unaware that the quiet woman still seated at the table had been signing his paychecks for 4 years. That night, in a private dining room in Houston's Galleria district, Nathaniel Ose Bonsu raised a champagne glass and told everyone who mattered in his life that he had finally found his intellectual equal, a woman named Cassandra Webb. A woman built, he said, for a man who needed to be pushed. What Nathaniel did not know, what not one of those 43 witnesses could have known, was that Cassandra had spent 3 years employed inside a company Renata co-founded, drawing a salary Renata's compensation committee had approved, building a career on a structure Renata had built from the ground up. She was Cassandra's boss. She was his. And the $220 million company whose success he was toasting as his own greatest achievement? He had been working for his wife since the day he was hired. Somewhere in the room, a champagne flute was set back against the table too deliberately, a small, flat sound no one acknowledged. Nathaniel's mother, Gloria, watched from across the room with the composed satisfaction of a woman whose verdict had finally been delivered. And Renata, 39 years old, 6 weeks out from a miscarriage no one in that room knew about, wearing a dress pulled from the back of a closet, sat with both hands in her lap and did not move. This is not just a story about a man who left his wife. This is a story about what happens when a man spends years signing his name to a life he never actually built, and the woman he dismissed decides finally to show him the receipts. If this is the kind of story that finds you when you need it, hit that like button and subscribe so you're here when it pays off. And drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Because to understand exactly what Nathaniel Ose Bonsu was about to lose, we need to go back to where Renata Mbeki began. And the beginning, the real beginning, was not in a spare bedroom in 2009, or a seminar room at Rice, or a boardroom in Austin. It was here. It was this. 43 people gathered to mark 15 years of a marriage, a dining room warm with candlelight and conversation, and a woman sitting very still while the room rearranged itself around what her husband had just decided to say out loud. Nathaniel had been speaking for 7 minutes. Renata had counted. He began with himself, as he usually did. The Series D on the horizon. 41 people in his department now, up from 12. Vela's growth trajectory, which he described as though he had authored it, in the particular tone of a man who has confused proximity to a thing with the creation of it. The guests responded warmly. The wine was good. Then he said Cassandra's name, and something changed in the room's temperature. A subtle drop, like a door opening somewhere off to the side. She rose from 3 chairs down the table. Cassandra Webb, 33, in an ivory blazer with structured shoulders and the kind of deliberate posture that announces itself before a single word is spoken. Nathaniel said the words he had clearly prepared. True intellectual equal, partner in vision, the woman he intended to build the next chapter of his life with, once his current circumstances allowed for it. He delivered this in the unhurried rhythm of a man releasing something long overdue. He did not look at Renata once during the recitation. At the far end of the table, 3 Vela colleagues sat with their faces carefully neutral. They knew who Renata Mbeki was. They had attended compensation committee readouts she chaired. They had CC'd emails to R. Mbeki at the board address. They had been keeping their expressions exactly this still for 4 years, and they were very good at it now. Renata's cousin Delia, seated 2 chairs to her right, reached beneath the tablecloth and found her hand. Renata held it for 3 seconds, long enough to acknowledge, brief enough to stay composed, and moved it gently back to her lap. She was 39 years old. 6 weeks out from a pregnancy that had ended without announcement, at 6 in the morning, in a hospital bathroom while Nathaniel was in a meeting he had not rescheduled. Her body still carried the quiet aftermath of it, a softness at her middle, a heaviness she had stopped trying to name. 3 days ago, Nathaniel had stood in the doorway of their bedroom and told her, in the careful tone of someone issuing a useful correction, that the weight she had put on recently was noticeable. In the wrong ways. She had been standing in a body that had recently been trying to sustain life when he said this. She had said nothing. She sat with her spine straight and both hands in her lap, and her face arranged into the particular stillness that Delia recognized, and Nathaniel had long since stopped noticing. The expression of a woman engaged in precise, uninterruptible thought. Near the end of the meal, Gloria leaned close. What she said was brief enough that only Renata heard it, and quiet enough that it would never be provable. What it did to Renata's face was visible only to Delia, who had been watching since the toast, and who would describe it later only as a woman landing on something. Renata excused herself. In the restroom at the back of the restaurant, she stood at the sink for 90 seconds, with cold water running over the inside of her wrists. She looked at her own face in the mirror, not to assess it, just to locate herself in it. Then she turned off the tap, dried her hands, and walked back out. She stayed until the last goodbye. She embraced people. She thanked Maison Doré's manager, a man named Patrick Roux, for the evening. She collected her coat and her bag from the coat check, walked through a parking structure that smelled of exhaust and cooling concrete, and sat in the driver's seat in the dark for a moment that lasted longer than it needed to. Her laptop bag was on the passenger seat beside her. Inside it, folded small enough to fit inside a side pocket, was a letter she had been carrying for 15 years. She started the engine. To understand what Renata Osei-Bonsu was thinking on that drive home, and what she had already decided, we need to go back to where the real story began. Adayeze Chidinma Mbeki arrived in Sugar Land, Texas in the spring of 1992 with 2 suitcases, a name no one in the neighborhood could pronounce on the first try, and a sum of money she told no one the exact amount of. She had sold her stake in a Lagos textile distribution company, a company she had built over 11 years from a single import license and a landline telephone, and brought the proceeds to America in a form that did not announce itself. No jewelry, no statements, a modest house on a quiet street in Fort Bend County, a new school enrollment for her daughter, and a set of beliefs she had tested against the hardest parts of her life and found to be sound. Adayze had 2 rules: build the thing before you name it, and never let anyone see the full size of what you carry until you understand who they are without the weight of it. She established Mbeki Textile Imports in Houston the following year, incorporated in her own name, and grew it over the next decade with the deliberateness of someone who understood that visibility and security were not the same thing. She did not seek press. She sought documentation, clean contracts, clear records, equity registered correctly and held quietly. By the time Renata left for Rice University on a partial scholarship and her mother's supplemental funding, Adayze had 17 wholesale accounts, 0 outstanding debt, and deeply held views about what it meant to build something that would last. Renata studied software engineering because the architecture of systems made sense to her the way her mother's architecture did, quietly, structurally, in ways that held even when no one was monitoring them. She met Marcus Holloway in her second year, unhurried, precise, a thinker who built before he announced. They worked together well in the way that people do when they have complementary instincts and no ego invested in credit. In 2009, in the spare bedroom of a rented house on Westheimer Road, they started a company. No name yet, no office, a second-hand server rack, Renata's compliance code, Marcus's business architecture, and $180,000 in seed capital that Adayze wired from a Sugar Land account without being asked twice. When the incorporation papers were filed for what would become Vela Technologies, Renata signed as Renata Adayeze Mbeki. Adayeze had been clear: anything that mattered should carry the name she came into the world with. Not as a strategy, as a fact about who she was. Renata did not debate this. It was simply true. Vela received its Series A in 2013 at a $14 million valuation. By then, the platform was doing $4.2 million in annual recurring revenue and had offices in Houston and Austin. Renata's name was in every founding document, every equity certificate, every board resolution. It was not in any press release. She did not appear at investor events. She had a board seat under a name that Nathaniel Osi Bonsu, who had been her husband for 3 years by then, had never once thought to look up. She had met him in October 2007. A fundraising gala for a children's literacy foundation held near the Manil Collection on a warm fall evening. He was 30 years old, working as a senior analyst at Meridian Capital Partners, and he spent 20 minutes engineering an introduction because he had attended a Rice symposium the previous spring and heard her speak and remembered specific things she had said. That was the detail that undid her, not his looks or his ease in a room, but the fact that he had listened and kept what he heard. She was 27 and had spent 3 years in a spare bedroom building something invisible, and she let herself be moved by a man who paid attention. The early years of the marriage were real. That matters. The tenderness was not performed. He read her technical papers and asked questions and waited for full answers. Their son, Kofi, was born in 2010, and Nathaniel held him for 3 hours in the hospital and cried without embarrassment, and Renata loved the man who did that completely, and it would take her a long time to stop grieving the distance between who he was then and who he became. On the night before the wedding, Adais had come to sit with her in the kitchen. It was late. The dress was hung, and the arrangements were settled, and they sat the way they had always settled important things, without ceremony, with honesty. Adais looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she said, "When a man asks you to be smaller, it is never about your size. It is about his." Renata wrote it down that night in a letter she was drafting to herself, a private record of things she wanted to remember. She folded the letter and put it in her laptop bag. She thought she understood what her mother meant. She didn't. Not yet. The first cut came in late 2012. Vela was growing, Austin office, Series A in progress, and Renata was on board calls 3 times a week. One evening, Nathaniel set down his fork and looked at her across the table with the unhurried expression of a man about to offer something. "You've already built something," he said. His voice was warm. "Let Marcus run the day-to-day. Be here. Be present." She heard generosity. She believed in those years that his certainty meant he was right about things. She transitioned to a silent board seat. She kept her maiden name on every Vela document because that had stopped feeling like a decision long ago. She told herself it was a reasonable compromise. The compromise would hold for years. The man who asked for it would not. The erosion did not begin all at once. It rarely does. It began at Christmas. Gloria Ose Bonsu arrived at their Houston home in December 2013 with gifts that had been precisely chosen and an expression that managed to be warm and appraising simultaneously. The look of a woman who has already reached her conclusion and is simply gathering confirmation. She embraced Renata at the door, stepped back, and regarded her in the way you regard a room you are considering redecorating. "You look so settled, darling," she said. "It's wonderful to watch a woman find her place." The words were arranged to sound like a compliment. The weight behind them was not. Over dinner, while Kofi, 3 years old, absorbed entirely in the destruction of a bread roll, sat at the end of the table, Gloria asked Renata casually, between courses, in front of Nathaniel's two older brothers and their wives, whether she missed working. The question was designed to establish that she no longer did. Renata said she had remained connected to her field. Gloria nodded in the specific way of someone who has received an unsatisfying answer and does not intend to ask again. Later that evening, through the kitchen doorway, Renata heard her telling Nathaniel's sister-in-law that Renata was one of those quiet ones, very content, very domestic. She said it with the warmth of a woman describing a well-behaved house pet. Renata went to the sink and filled a glass of water and drank it slowly. The pattern that followed had the quiet inevitability of a slow leak. Nathaniel began correcting her at dinner parties, never harshly, always with the smooth patience of a man who is clarifying things, interrupting mid-sentence to explain what she had meant, finishing her thoughts with different conclusions than the ones she had been building toward. She noticed it the first time in 2014. By 2016, she had learned to finish her sentences faster, or not begin them at all. In 2017, Nathaniel informed her he was consolidating the household accounts to simplify the finances. Her supplemental card for personal expenses was canceled. If she needed something, she should let him know. He said this in the tone of a man streamlining an inefficient system. She accepted it in the tone of a woman who had learned not to make problems out of inconveniences. On the Vela Compensation Committee documents she signed that same January, she had approved his $380,000 base salary and performance bonus for the year. He did not know this. He had never thought to look. Gloria's name for her calcified quietly during this period. Not Renata, not Nathaniel's wife, the quiet one. It appeared in family message threads, at community events, in phone calls Renata was not on, but was sometimes told about by Nathaniel's cousin Abena, who relayed these things with the careful neutrality of someone who believed Renata should know and did not want to be responsible for what she did with the knowing. Then the distance in the marriage changed texture. It had been there for years, the late nights, the social calendar filling without her, the bed she fell asleep in alone 3 or 4 nights a week. She had been explaining it to herself with the explanations available. Stretched thin, demanding role. This was what a certain kind of professional life looked like from the outside. She had been doubting her own perception with more energy than she was trusting it, which is a particular kind of exhaustion that leaves no visible mark. In the summer of 2019, during a routine compensation committee review, Renata approved the hire of a new senior product strategist for Vela's Austin office. The file gave a name, a portfolio, 2 strong references from enterprise clients. She signed the approval and moved to the next item on the agenda. The following November, she attended the Vela annual department dinner at Farrow and Grain in Midtown as Marcus Holloway's guest. Nathaniel was present. When the table moved to introductions, he gestured in her direction and said simply, "My wife, Renata." Nothing further. 3 people at that table, Denise Okafor from product management, Thomas Wu from engineering, and Patricia Amara in legal, exchanged a glance so brief and controlled it would have been invisible to anyone not already watching for it. Renata was watching for it. She filed it away without letting anything reach her face. Something was accumulating. She did not yet have the full shape of what it was. The shape arrived the following spring. Nathaniel had left his phone on the kitchen counter, unlocked, while he showered. An email notification lit the screen. An internal Vela thread, a name she recognized from the Austin hire, CC'd to his address. She saw the sender. She saw the small profile photo that loaded in the preview. She recognized the company domain. She stood at the counter with her hand flat on the granite and held very still, feeling the weight of something arranging itself into a form she had been unwilling to name. She placed the phone back where she had found it. She told herself she was misreading things. She kept telling herself this until September 2021, when Nathaniel sat at the kitchen table helping Kofi with a school project on career pathways, and said, gesturing loosely in Renata's direction, "Your mom used to work in tech." Past tense, at her own table, in her presence, to her child. Kofi looked up at his mother. Renata smiled at her son. She said nothing. After dinner, she stood at the kitchen sink and washed the plates one at a time and listened to the sound of the water. She chose, one more time, to wait. She had been patient for the right reasons. What was coming would make patience impossible. In October 2022, Nathaniel informed her he was restructuring the household accounts to streamline their finances. The joint checking they had held for 14 years was consolidated into an account under his name. Her supplemental card had already been canceled in 2017. Now the shared savings, the property tax fund, and the home maintenance account all required his approval for any transaction. He used the word simplify twice in the same breath and looked at her the way a person looks when they have already decided and are describing rather than discussing. She said she understood. She did understand. More than he knew. On every Vela Compensation Committee resolution she had signed that same quarter, she had signed as R. Mbeki, authorizing his $380,000 base salary and the performance equity he would receive in January. The household money was now his to manage. The company money had always been hers. A month later, Gloria came for Kofi's birthday. She arrived with a cake from a bakery on Westheimer and the particular energy of a woman who has rehearsed what she intends to say. After dinner, while Renata was at the kitchen sink, she heard Gloria's voice from the living room, warm, unhurried, designed to carry. "Strong families have strong fathers at the center, Kofi. That is simply how it works best." Kofi was 13. He was listening to every adult in his life and taking notes about what to believe. Renata dried her hands. She walked to the doorway and stood there. She said nothing. But her hands, hidden by the frame, were pressed flat against the wall. The Vela Winter Retreat that December was held at a resort property outside San Antonio. Nathaniel attended. On the second evening, during the department dinner in the main lodge, he stood to address the upcoming Series D and the team built to deliver it. He spoke about Cassandra Webb for 4 minutes, her instincts, her vision, her drive. He used the phrase exactly the kind of ambition this company needs, and let it land like a compliment to himself. 3 Vela employees at the table, Denise Okafor, Thomas Wu, and a product manager named Grace Asante, looked at one another and looked away. They said nothing. They had been keeping their faces exactly this still for 2 years. The story Nathaniel told at Vela, and at every company function he attended without his wife, was that she had stepped back from her career to support the family. He said it warmly, with the tone of a man describing a sacrifice made willingly, and he repeated it enough that it settled into the way people there understood him. Cassandra had been given this version early on, and had no reason to question it. She believed that the woman who made Nathaniel's breakfast had once worked in tech and chosen a quieter life. She had no way of knowing that the woman who made his breakfast had also approved her hire, signed her annual review, and sat on the board of the company she was still climbing. Then February came. Renata lost a pregnancy at 8 weeks. It happened on a Thursday morning at St. Luke's on Fannin Street, attended by a physician named Dr. Imogene Park, who was precise and kind and did not waste either quality. Nathaniel had arrived still in his coat from a morning meeting and sat in the chair by the window and said the correct words in the correct sequence. He did not touch her. He looked at his phone more than he looked at his wife, and he left before she was discharged because he said his afternoon could not be moved. He was not unkind. He was simply elsewhere, even while present, which is its own kind of abandonment. Gloria did not visit. She sent a message to Nathaniel, not to Renata, that she hoped things had resolved without too much difficulty. Nathaniel mentioned this to Renata 3 days later, in passing. On that same phone, somewhere in a thread Renata had not seen and would not see, a notification had arrived from a Vela corporate email address. The message read, "Thinking of you." Renata was at home, recovering, moving through rooms that held too much silence, her body carrying the specific exhaustion of grief that has nowhere visible to go. 3 days before the anniversary dinner, Nathaniel stood in the bedroom doorway while she dressed. She was in the middle of it, arms raised, the fabric of a blouse not yet settled, and he looked at her the way you look at something that requires maintenance. Her full hips, the rounded softness of her stomach, the body that had just tried and failed to hold a life. He said, "The weight you've put on this year is noticeable, in the wrong ways." He said it in the tone of a man providing a useful observation. Then he left for work. She stood at the closet for a long time. That evening she was looking for a document in his home office when she found the letter on his desk. Formal stationery. Meridian Capital Partners letterhead. A letter of investor interest addressed to Vela Technologies Investment Relations Office at a P.O. box in Austin she recognized immediately. The proposed commitment, $800,000 in joint asset funds. His name at the bottom, her company's address at the top. She read it twice. Something moved through her chest, not loudly but completely, and when it finished moving, it left behind a stillness she recognized as the final moment before a decision. She photographed every page. She opened her email, typed the address for Imani Charles at Charles & Okafor LLP, attached the photographs, and sent the message at 11:47 p.m. 3 days later, she sat at the end of a long table at Maison Dorée and listened to her husband explain who he was. Nathaniel had reserved the private dining room 6 weeks in advance. Post Oak Boulevard. Ivory walls. Low lighting and the kind of deliberate quiet that expensive rooms buy. 43 guests arranged at 2 long tables pushed together, the evening progressing with the careful normalcy of a gathering where most people sense something has broken, and none of them intend to be the one to acknowledge it. Renata's laptop bag was on the chair beside her. She had carried it from habit, the way you carry something so long it stops registering as a decision. The letter was inside it. She was in a black dress pulled from the back of her closet that afternoon, her body, 6 weeks out from the loss at St. Luke's, still soft in places that felt tender if she thought about them too directly. 3 days ago, Nathaniel had stood in the doorway and found her insufficient. Tonight she had carried that information to a restaurant, arranged her face above it, and was sitting with her spine straight and both hands in her lap. Gloria was seated 3 chairs to her left. Not adjacent, strategic. She had arrived early and selected the position herself, close enough to observe and positioned to communicate satisfaction with minimal movement. She wore a deep burgundy dress and the expression of a woman attending something she had long anticipated. Cassandra Webb sat midway down the table on the opposite side. Renata had known she would be there. She was dressed in ivory, carrying herself with the upright composure of a woman who knows exactly why she was invited. She had been attending Vela events for 4 years. She had received promotions that Renata's compensation committee approved. She believed she was the ending of a story Renata had already finished telling. She didn't know. She had no way of knowing. Nathaniel rose after the first course. The room quieted the way rooms quiet when a performance is beginning. He was composed and comfortable, the expression of a man who has arranged the room around himself and is taking inventory of the result. He spoke about Vela first, the $220 million Series C valuation, 41 people in his department, the Series D roadshow he was leading. He delivered the company's growth as his own biography. While he spoke, the laptop bag sat 8 feet away on the chair beside his wife, holding the founding documents that predated everything he was describing by 4 years. He did not look at her during this section. He was already past her. Then he said Cassandra's name. She rose with the ease of someone who has been waiting for this moment and has dressed for it accordingly. Nathaniel spoke for 4 minutes. True intellectual equal, partner in vision, a woman built for what comes next. He used the phrase, different kind of woman once, a phrase he had used before at a Vela department dinner with his wife 2 seats away, and it landed in Renata's chest with the familiar, specific weight of something she had been carrying for 2 years. She knew exactly what kind of different he meant. She had stood in a restroom at that department dinner thinking about what it meant for ambition to have a face, and what it meant to be told that face was not hers. Denise Okafor, Thomas Wu, and Grace Asante, 3 Vela employees who knew precisely who Renata Mbeki was, looked at their plates and kept them there. Gloria set her water glass down very slowly and did not look at Renata directly. She did not need to. Delia, seated to Renata's right, reached beneath the tablecloth and found her hand. Renata held it for 3 seconds. Then she moved her hand quietly back to her lap. The dinner continued. Courses came and were cleared. Conversation rebuilt itself around what had happened, the way conversation does, with extra effort and louder laughs than usual. Near the end of the meal, Gloria leaned toward Renata and said something close to her ear. Brief. Quiet. The kind of sentence that cannot be proven later. What it did to Renata's face lasted a single second. Not flinching, not crumbling, something more like the last number of an equation finding its place. Delia saw it. No one else was watching. Renata excused herself. The restroom at the back of the restaurant was narrow and warm with a long mirror above the sink. She turned the cold tap and pressed her wrists under it. She looked at her own face, her full features, her natural hair pinned for the occasion, the dress that was doing what it could, and she looked without apology and without negotiation. She was 39 years old. She had built something of extraordinary size and permanence from a spare bedroom and a second-hand server rack, and she had loved a man completely. And he was currently, at a table in the next room, delivering a 4-minute tribute to the woman he had chosen in her place. She opened the bag. Her hand found the letter. She did not remove it. She already knew every word. What moved through her in that moment was not calculation and not bitterness. It was older than both, the specific stillness of a person who has stopped asking a question they already know the answer to. She closed the bag. She dried her hands. She walked back out. She finished the evening. She said goodbye to 43 people, most of whom found reasons to look slightly to the left of her eyes. She thanked the room manager, Patrick Rue, for the evening, and retrieved her coat and her bag, and walked to her car alone. That night, for the first time in 15 years, she took the letter out of her bag. The house was quiet in the particular way that a house is quiet when someone is absent who should not be. Renata had been inside for 20 minutes. She had not turned on many lights. She had not changed out of her dress. She had set her bag on the kitchen table, stood for a moment in the stillness, then pulled out a chair and sat down. She opened the front pocket of the bag and took out the letter. It was folded into thirds, the fold lines pressed soft with age. Adaise's handwriting faded to warmth at the edges, but fully legible in the center where the ink had been sheltered from the light. Renata had sealed this herself the night before her wedding, had carried it unopened for 15 years. She had carried it without opening it the way you carry a thing you are not yet ready to need. She unfolded it. She read it. There was the sentence near the bottom of the page, in her mother's even hand. When a man asks you to be smaller, it is never about your size. It is about his. She had read this once before, on the night she wrote it, when she was 27 years old and did not yet know what it was teaching her. She had thought she understood. She had not. She had carried the letter through 15 years of dinners where she learned to finish her sentences faster or abandon them entirely, through parties where she was introduced without context, without profession, without history, through a hospital room at St. Luke's where no one held her hand, through an anniversary dinner where her husband stood up and pointed at the woman he had selected to stand where she stood. She had carried it through all of it, and now she read it again. She understood it now, completely. From the other side of everything it had predicted, something settled in her, not pain, not release, something more structural than either, the specific sensation of a thing that has been misaligned for a long time, finally finding its position. She folded the letter. She placed it on the table. She opened her laptop. She searched her email archive. Vela Compensation Committee. Approval. The results loaded in sequence. January 2020, January 2021, January 2022, January 2023. 4 annual cycles. Base salary authorizations. Performance equity approvals. Bonus confirmations. On every document, in the signature field, R.M. Becky, Chair, Compensation Committee. His name in the recipient line. Her name in the authorization. 4 years. $2.1 million in total compensation. She had signed every one. She opened the photographs she had taken in his office. The Meridian Capital Partners letter, $800,000 of joint assets submitted to Vela's investment relations desk, his signature at the bottom, her company's address at the top. She looked at the documents side by side for a moment, then closed the laptop. She picked up her phone. It was 11:43 p.m. Imani Charles answered on the second ring. "It's Renata." "I know." A short pause. "I've been expecting your call. I want to move forward." "I have everything I need," Imani said. "I've had it for 14 months. You give me the date and I'll have the folder ready." "The Vela Series D Investor Day," Renata said. "Find out when it is." The sound of a pen, brief and unhurried. "I'll have the date for you by morning." "That's all," Renata said. "Good night, Renata." She set the phone on the table. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on its surface and looked at the room around her, the kitchen she had cooked in for 11 years, the window above the sink, the small photograph of Kofi at age 5 pinned to the cabinet with a pushpin. Never moved. This was a room she knew completely. She would negotiate the house into her name in the settlement. She was going to be all right. She closed the email archive. She set the laptop aside. She filled the kettle and stood at the counter while it heated, her arms loose, her breathing even, her back straight, not from effort but from the absence of the weight she had been bracing against for years. The distinction was new. She noticed it. She made the tea. She drank it at the table without hurrying. She did not wait for the sound of his key. She did not rehearse anything. She went to bed before midnight and slept through the night in the uninterrupted way of someone who has made a decision and set it down and does not intend to pick it back up until morning. Before she slept, she placed Adaise's letter back in the front pocket of her laptop bag, exactly where it had always been, exactly where it had traveled with her through 15 years of a life she was no longer willing to make smaller, and closed the bag. Imani Charles arrived at her office the following morning with a folder she had been quietly building for 14 months. Imani Charles spent the 4 weeks between the anniversary dinner and the investor day converting 14 months of preparation into 12 documents organized in a single manila folder labeled with one date, Thursday the 14th of March. Vela Technologies Series D Investor Day, Austin Convention Center, Suite 4A. Lead presenter, Nathaniel Osei Bonsu, VP of Corporate Development. He had been preparing for 6 weeks. The presentation was 112 slides, assembled from Vela's growth data, financial projections, and product roadmap. He had rehearsed it 4 times and sharpened the opening narrative 3 times, trimming and tightening the story of Vela's origins into something that felt, in the telling, like his to tell. He arrived at the convention center at 7:55 a.m. in a dark suit, checked the AV setup, shook the right hands, and positioned himself at the front of the room the way he always positioned himself. At the center, exactly where he believed he belonged. The room filled by 47 institutional investors in tiered rows. Marcus Holloway in the front left seat, jacket off, arms relaxed, his expression that of a man who knows exactly how something ends and is content to wait for it. In the third row, Cassandra Webb arranged her legal pad and pen with the composed precision of someone who has also prepared. In the very last row, near the exit, Imani Charles set a manila folder on the desk surface, folded her hands on top of it, and did not open it. Nathaniel did not look at her. He had never met her. At 9:04 a.m., he advanced to the first slide. Vela Technologies, founded 2009 by Marcus Holloway and Renata Mbeki. He moved past it the way he had moved past it 200 times without reading, already advancing before the words finished registering. He knew this slide. He had never needed to know it. At the 9:11 mark, following the company overview, Marcus rose briefly and said, "Before financials, I'd like to bring in our board chair for the welcome address." He sat back down and looked at his folded hands. The AV technician, a young man named Darius Okafor, switched the feed. The 9-foot display behind the podium changed. Renata appeared. She was at a desk in Houston, a window behind her with afternoon light falling across her shoulders in a way that had not been arranged, simply the light of a place where she was at ease and had been for a long time. Her natural hair was out, full and uncontained. She wore a deep green dress, and at her ears, catching the afternoon light in 2 small, warm points, were her mother's gold earrings. In the third row, Cassandra Webb looked at the screen. She had heard the name in Marcus's introduction. She had moved past the founding slide the same way Nathaniel had moved past it for 4 years, without stopping, without connecting the name Renata Mbeki on a company document to any person she could picture. Now she looked at the face on the screen. She looked at the name on the slide header still visible at the corner of the display. She looked at the face again. 4 seconds. Something rearranged itself in Cassandra's expression. Not loudly, not with any visible collapse, but the rearrangement of a person whose map has been handed to them after they have already arrived. She set her pen on the legal pad. She did not pick it up again. "Welcome to Vela's Series D." Renata's voice was the same voice it had always been, measured, unhurried, the voice of a woman who had never needed volume to carry weight. "I'm Renata Mbeki, co-founder and board chair." A pause, not for effect, but for precision. For the benefit of any new faces in the room, her eyes held the camera without moving. "I've been here since the beginning." The room was still. Nathaniel stood at the podium with the slide advancer in his hand. He had registered the name in Marcus's introduction the way you register a sound from a room you are not in. Present, not yet translated. The translation arrived now, traveling the distance between a name on a compensation approval he had been receiving for 4 years and the face of the woman who had signed it, who made his breakfast, who sat at the end of a table at Maison Dorée 3 weeks ago and absorbed a 4-minute speech about another woman's ambition without making a sound. 7 seconds. Then his face changed. Not to anger, not yet to anything defended. For those 7 seconds it was simply recognition. The specific, leveling recognition of a man who has fully understood, all at once, the size of what he did not know, and what he discarded in his not knowing, and that the person he discarded had been holding the full weight of it in documents he had never thought to read. In the back row, Imani Charles opened the folder. She walked, without hurrying, to the front of the room. She set the first document on the presenter's table and turned it to face him. Vela Technologies, Executive Compensation Approval, January 2020. Authorization field, R. Mbeki, Chair. Recipient field, N. Ose Bonsu, VP Corporate Development. Base salary approved, $380,000. She placed the next one beside it, January 2021, then 2022, then 2023. 4 approvals, 4 signatures, his name in every recipient field, her name in every authorization line. Then a 5th document, his Series D letter of investor interest from Meridian Capital Partners, $800,000 of joint assets committed, his signature at the bottom. Stamped across its face in red, declined. Nathaniel looked at the documents. He did not speak. Marcus Holloway rose from the front row. "For the record," he said, in the even, unhurried register of a man delivering information he has already written down and does not need to perform. Renata Mbeki co-founded this company in 2009 and has served as board member and compensation committee chair since incorporation. Her role and governance authority are documented in every regulatory filing Vela has produced. He sat down. That was all he intended to say. The room did not move. 47 investors watched a man at a podium hold 4 years of his own documentation in his hands. In the 3rd row, Cassandra Webb collected her legal pad, her pen, and her phone. She stood. She moved along the row toward the aisle, without brushing anyone's shoulder, without pausing, and without once directing her eyes toward Nathaniel. She reached the side exit and walked through it. The door closed behind her with the soft, decisive sound of a person who has already calculated the situation and found nothing in it worth staying for. On the screen, Renata finished the board address. She thanked the room. She said Marcus and the team would walk through financials in the next segment. She looked at the camera for one moment that held no performance in it, only the composed attention of a woman who has said exactly what she intended to say. Then the feed cut back to the slide deck. The founding slide appeared. Marcus Holloway and Renata Mbeki. Present tense. 9 feet wide. Imani Charles returned to the back row and closed the folder. Nathaniel Ose Bonsu remained at the front of the company his wife had founded, holding documents she had signed in a room full of people who now knew precisely what he had not. He did not continue the presentation. Marcus Holloway rose and took it from there. The drive back to Houston took 3 hours. The consequences took 60 days. Nathaniel's employment at Vela concluded 18 days after the investor event. Imani Charles managed the separation agreement through a single exchange of documents, accepted without contest and without counterclaim. His name was removed from the company directory on the 19th day. His access credentials were deactivated. His Series D application was formally withdrawn from the Vela Investment Relations records and marked ineligible under board conflict protocols. The relevant joint assets had already been addressed in the divorce proceeding, a proceeding Nathaniel had initiated 3 weeks before the investor day, and which was now resolving along lines that left him with considerably less than he had anticipated. Cassandra Webb submitted her resignation from Vela Technologies on the 14th day after Austin. No announcement, no farewell to the department. Her access closed at 5 p.m. on a Wednesday. By Thursday morning, the directory had been updated. She did not contact Nathaniel to explain her decision. There was nothing to explain. The relationship dissolved the way arrangements built on access dissolve when the access ends. without ceremony, without a single backward glance. Nathaniel sent 22 text messages over the following 30 days. Renata did not open them. The phone displayed a count. The count climbed to 22 and stopped. Gloria Osebonsu did not attend the next 3 events in the Houston diaspora social calendar, where Adaize Mbeki was known to be present. This was noticed. It was not discussed. What remained for Nathaniel, after all of it, was not destitution. Imani had negotiated equitably and without cruelty. What was gone was the story. The version of himself he had been maintaining for 15 years. The self-made architect of a company's growth, the man who had built something, had no structure that would hold against documentation. He had advanced inside a company his wife had founded. He had delivered 4 years of vision and momentum inside an infrastructure she had built before he arrived. The story had required a woman in the background. She had never been in the background. The story was over. Then the scene softened into something quieter. Adaize Mbeki drove in from Sugarland on a Tuesday and did not call ahead. By the time Renata came downstairs, the kitchen smelled of onion and palm oil and the warmth of someone who has made a meal for you before you knew you were hungry. They ate at the kitchen table, Adaize and Renata, and Kofi at the end with a geometry textbook he kept nudging sideways to make room for his plate. Adaize did not say, "I told you so." She was not that kind of woman. She reached across the table and covered Renata's hand with hers, and held it without speaking. And Renata let herself be held there, and the kitchen was warm, and her son was doing homework 4 feet away, and nothing needed to be said. Later, after her mother had gone to bed, Renata opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The Houston night was still and warm. Above the tree line, the stars were beginning to show. She sat in the wooden chair that had always been there, that she had negotiated into her name along with the house, and reached into the pocket of her robe and took out the letter. She did not read it. She already knew every word. She held it the way you hold something that was present on the night you needed it most and did not fail you. And she let the weight of the paper settle into her hands, and she breathed, and she took up as much space as she actually occupied. Adaize had said it the night before the wedding. She had said it again at a hospital bedside, into a room where a pregnancy had ended, and a husband was absent. And now, in the quiet of this back porch, with her son asleep down the hall and her mother in the guest room and a company worth $74.8 million still registered under the name no one had thought to look up. The sentence arrived for the 3rd and final time, not as warning, not as confirmation, but as the complete shape of everything it had predicted. When a man asks you to be smaller, it is never about your size. It is about his. Quiet strength is not the absence of power. It is the knowledge of when power is necessary and the patience to wait for that moment, undamaged and unhurried, while the world around you quietly proves you right. The woman who signed his paychecks was never invisible. He simply never looked. If this story found you at the right moment, if you know what it feels like to carry something real while someone stands in front of you and calls you insufficient, leave a comment and tell us what stayed with you. And tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight, because these stories travel to quiet places, and we would love to know where yours is. She stayed on the back porch until the stars were fully out over Houston, until the night was very still, and she was at peace with the full size of what she had always been. She stayed until she was ready. And when she finally went inside, she closed the door quietly behind her, and she did not look back.